Purdue was one of the most dominant teams in the country throughout the entire season. Spent a bunch of time at number one with good reason. You see how the first 38 games of the year played out for the Boilers. Offensive efficiency amongst the best in America. The three-point field goal attempts per game and the percentage was a big part of the reason that they enhanced their productivity versus last year. The rebound margin was really surprising last night. We knew UConn was an excellent rebounding team, but Purdue had been exceptional on the boards throughout much of the season. They were out-rebounded last night. It felt like that was a big factor in the game last night. Now let's go out to Glendale with Dave Refson and see what their thoughts were coming out of the game.
Here in Glendale, Arizona, Dave Refson, Mike Sikorsky, and Robbie Hummel after watching UConn take down Purdue 75-60 in the national championship game as the Boilermakers fall one win short of what would have been their first ever national championship. Guys, interested in your takeaways on this game. Robbie, I can start with you. What did you see as the difference?
Well, it was clear the game plan for UConn was we're going to let Edey play one-on-one and we're going to shut everybody else off. And a lot of teams have said they're going to do that, but not many teams have been able to actually implement that. And the game plan, high-level stuff by Dan Hurley, the 50-50 plays, some of the issues Purdue had on the defensive glass certainly showed through. And then I think the biggest thing, yes, Edey got his points, Braden Smith had his moments, but Lance Jones, Fletcher Lawyer, those guys were taken away by UConn. Their size in the backcourt, certainly Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, that's a lot to deal with on both ends. And the guards for UConn were just better tonight.
I thought really Purdue, with everything that they tried to do, it just couldn't quite get it done. With all the pressure they were getting on the perimeter, they were able to get to the lane, but I don't think they were decisive enough when they arrived. When they got to the rim, they weren't emphatic enough. When they got deep, they weren't able to locate shooters or often enough on occasions to get the ball to Zach in dangerous positions. That was really, for me, what was decisive, especially in the first half, when they were getting to the lane pretty comfortably, in part because of how they were being played, but also because they were being aggressive. But once they got in there, they just weren't decisive enough, and I thought that was a problem.
And again, a brilliant game plan for UConn, but it's one thing to have a brilliant game plan. It's another to implement it. They held Purdue to season lows in points, three-pointers made, and three-pointers attempted. That was kind of your point, Robbie. I just thought they did a wonderful job of saying kind of, hey, look, we're not going to get beaten by the three-point ball. Remember, Purdue's second in the nation in three-point percentage coming into this game. Just, again, I mean, even if they had hit more than half of them.
Well, they kind of did that to Alabama as well.
Yeah.
We thought the Crimson Tide might try to shoot 45 or 53s. They took 23 or 24. They made a lot. They made a lot more than Purdue did, but they limited their output as well. And give a lot of credit to the scouting report and certainly the way that those guys went out there and handled their business, because that's high-level stuff, and no one else has been able to do that to Purdue all year long.
Zach Edey, 37 points. He ends up with 177 points in this NCAA tournament. It ties him with the former U.S. Senator Bill Bradley for the second most all-time. Only Glenn Rice, the amazing national championship run for Michigan back in 1989, has had more in an NCAA tournament. He was fabulous, not only in this tournament, but in his entire career. I mean, one of the more memorable players we have ever covered in the Big Ten.
I have absolutely treasured watching him and covering him in person and when I'm in the studio. He is such a phenomenal player, and to watch his growth as a player, to watch him build his game, to watch him build his body and his stamina, to become more dynamic as a player. So many elements over and over again. And that's one of the things I've always loved about covering college basketball, is watching players improve over time. We don't get quite as much of that now in the era of coming into college, maybe playing 1-2 years, going to the NBA draft. But we saw him come from number 436 in his class to number one, and one of the greatest players in the history of the Big Ten, certainly the greatest player in the history of Purdue, and one of the greatest players in the history of college basketball.
And he puts up another massive number here tonight. I'll always remember the Tennessee game because you've got two first-team All-Americans who are just going at each other. And the way that Dalton Knecht was playing and the shot making, and Edey had an answer every time. The block at the end of that game to send Purdue to their first Final Four since 1980. He's a special player, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do as a pro. People doubted him in high school. People are doubting him right now. Man, he's been productive. He works on his game, it's going to be fascinating to see what he is as an NBA player, and time will tell. And that's the cool part about his story, because that's yet to be written, but he has all the tools.
And you mentioned first Final Four since 1980. It was the first national championship game for Purdue since 1969. They won their 26th Big Ten title, adding to their record for the most all time. So many incredible memories generated by this team. What stands out as you try to put this season into some sort of perspective?
Yeah, for me, what stands out is Detroit, being in the building, watching how emotional some people got about them winning. How
Anyone in particular?
Who's over there?
How Zach Edey just would not be denied in that game. The Lance Jones three-pointer. There were so many key plays down that stretch. Everyone in that building knew what was at stake. Two teams that had really wanted that. Purdue hadn't been there since '80. Tennessee had never been there. They were terrific teams, and they really wanted to be here. And I watched Purdue absolutely say they wouldn't be denied. I'll never not be impressed by that.
Yeah, I'll always think of just the long game. So many teams, players, coaches could be broken by a loss like the FDU loss, and then to come back and just work harder all summer and get after it in the fall. And then every time that they were challenged here in the season, they answered that call. I'll always think about the run, because it could have went south. You could have something like that and it doesn't work out. The pressure to make the Final Four was so immense. If they lose in that Elite Eight game to Tennessee, so many people, including Purdue fans, would say, well, what a failure of a year, which is sad, because they had a great season even without that game. But that game will always be remembered, and I just think for Purdue, the long game of, even with the failure, they were able to bounce back and have a very successful year.
Something Matt Painter said to me in the locker room immediately after the game. He said, I want that to be the narrative of this team, is the way that they bounced back, the way that they stuck together, the way that they set a goal and accomplished it. They obviously had a goal tonight they fell a little bit short of, but an amazing, amazing run by this group, and one that generated incredible memories for their legions of fans who showed up here in Arizona. That's going to do it for us for now from Glendale. Let's send it back to Anthony in Chicago.
Thanks, Dave. One of the highest scoring individual outputs we've ever seen in an NCAA championship game last night by Zach Edey. Those 37 points led the way for Purdue, led the way for the game, and especially the strong start, the emphatic start that Zach Edey got off to last night. Really impressive. Of course, not enough to get Purdue over the hump to come out with the win, but we wondered what that matchup would end up being, Trent Meacham, especially on the interior. Klingon and Edey, and we figured, all right, probably advantage Zach Edey, but would it be enough of an advantage to get Purdue over the hump? It proved not to be last night, but just schematically, strategically, going to Edey as much as they did, I did wonder about that throughout the game. Even in the second half, as the scoring margin began to increase a little bit, I did wonder, were things a bit too Edey heavy? And I don't know if he ever can be, but that was in my mind.
Well, I think there's no doubt Edey needed some more help, and he didn't really get that. Braden Smith, 12 points, 8 assists, 9 of those points were in the first half. But beyond those guys, only 11 points total from Purdue, 1 for 7 from the three. This is a team that's made over 8 threes a game. You got to have some bounce. I don't mind them going to Edey like they did. You got to 37 points, 15 for 25 from the field. You can't ask for more from Zach Edey. There was a stretch in that game, I believe the last 5 minutes or so of the first half, first 5 minutes of the second half, where Zach Edey didn't score. And that's where UConn really got that separation. And that's the point in time, too, where, especially the first half, UConn was in some foul trouble. Both Donovan Clegan, Samson Johnson. Yeah. And what I would have hoped is maybe Purdue could have even doubled down on really going to the post in that moment, and they just weren't able to. I thought Trey Coffin-Wren, another guy, early post-up bucket. He had an advantage on the inside, but didn't really get much going beyond that. They also didn't, Anthony, take advantage of the foul trouble. They got to the free throw line 15 times. That's not quite what they typically do. And they were in the bonus for about 20 minutes of gameplay and just weren't able to capitalize on that. If they could have done that, and then you got to make some threes as well. But UConn, their defense was fantastic, so you got to give them a ton of credit.
There's no doubt about that. It felt like, especially the early stretch of the game, I couldn't help, especially just with it all encompassed in basically a weekend, where it felt to me a little bit like the women's national championship game, where Caitlin Clark got off to this record-setting first quarter start for the Iowa Hawkeyes, 18 points there. And then, things sort of plateaued plateaued throughout the rest of the game. Zach Edey was so good and so energetic early. Things plateaued a little bit, and it seemed like Purdue didn't necessarily have a counter punch. Was there anything you felt like they could have done to be able to create more opportunities? Braden Smith had a few moments in the game, it seemed.
That's a great comparison because both Iowa women's, Purdue men's had the best player on the court, but the next 4 best players were probably from South Carolina women's and UConn men. But to answer your question, Anthony, I think Purdue just really struggled getting separation. All their guards and UConn's, look, top to bottom, everybody is an elite defender individually. They don't get into rotations. They don't have to help. They're in great position to rebound. They won the rebounding battle as well. Purdue needed to get more separation, whether that's on off-ball screens or on-ball screens. But, Stephen Castle blanketed Braden Smith for 94 feet, and Smith had a few things going. He was able to get to the rim some, dished it out a little bit, but Fletcher Lawyer, Mason Gillis, Lance Jones, none of these guys were able to get much separation to even get clean looks. They only got 7 threes up that game. And that's where the inability to rise up above UConn's guards and also the inability to get separation on ball screens. And UConn, for the most part, they're straight up with Zach Edey, so they weren't into the rotations that typically Purdue was used to seeing, where they're oftentimes taking horse shots. They just didn't get any of that last night. And
Zach Edey, just the 3rd Big Ten player to win AP Player of the Year and make the national championship game. So there's no doubt about the accomplishments of him as an individual, Purdue as a program as a whole. And not only was Purdue dominant and efficient offensively throughout the season, but defensively they were exceptional throughout the year as well. I was so impressed with UConn's offense, man. The way they moved the basketball, the consistency and the crispness of their movement and their passing. It just seemed like that took a lot of energy for Purdue to sustain trying to stick with them.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned defensively, everybody on UConn was elite. Well, offensively, there's no weak links. Everybody is a threat. They can do it from the inside. They can do it from the outside. They didn't shoot the ball particularly well, but they're getting high-quality looks every possession down. It feels like when you watch UConn, they're fighting every single possession. They value the ball every single possession. I think 2 things, the pace that they run their offense with the precision, that ball sees multiple sides of the floor. It gives it more time for that defense to break down, and anybody's a threat. Anybody can go break loose and make a play on their own. So it's beautiful basketball. What they did back-to-back is beyond remarkable, especially in this day and age. And Purdue, look, a great season. You just ended up running into a better team. I think there's many years this Purdue ball club wins a national championship, but UConn was just a better team this season and definitely last night.
And it certainly felt that way, just watching the way the game plays out. When Dan Hurley wasn't, shoving players, towards the ball or anything like that, then he was coaching at a really high level. Also, a guy like Cam Spencer, who Big Ten fans have certainly witnessed before, but you were making a comment to me even off air about the way that he can be utilized in UConn's scheme, because he's not going to be the first option on the scouting report for the opponent. But when you have someone with his versatility and experience, Purdue really struggled trying to stick with him.
There's no doubt. And Cam Spencer, he's surrounded by studs, guys that likely go in the first round of the NBA draft. Spencer will not be on the top of your scouting report. He's not who you put your best defender on, but so smart, so intelligent, so tough. He gets to the boards. He can make decisions out of ball screens. He can knock down shots about 44% from the year. So I thought a guy from Rutgers would be a nice pickup, maybe come off the bench, knock down some shots. Well, in the half court for UConn, he's a guy that kind of makes them go because he's so smart. The ball moves, and then he can make plays for himself and for teammates.
It certainly showed up last night, as it has throughout the season for UConn. So credit to them for what they were able to get done. Number 1 overall seed with very good reason. We'll have more reaction on not only last night's game, but we'll get Trent's thoughts just on the program as a whole. What we saw this season from the Boilermakers, and certainly the legacy conversation is one that's worth having.